Latest news bulletin with a news alert coming in from the United States. One person has died and a police officer has been injured after a shooting at a high school in Tennessee's Knoxville. Soon after the shooting, the Knoxville Police Department tweeted that multiple gunshot victims have been reported. The police urged the people to avoid the area as the investigation into the crime continues. Just last week, Republican Governor Bill Lee signed a legislation allowing most adults in Tennessee to carry handguns, openly or concealed, without clearing a background check and training. Now, for more on this story coming from the United States, WION's correspondent Nick Harper is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Nick, thanks for joining us. What do we know about this shooting so far, the casualties, as well as the motive behind the crime?
Well, certainly it was a very confused situation to begin with when police officers were tweeting about what happened. We now know that one person has died at the scene. That was the suspected gunman. Police responded to reports of an armed gunman at the school, Austin East School in Knoxville, Tennessee. When they went there, they found the suspect inside a bathroom. They asked him to come out. He refused. He started firing and shot one of the police officers. We're told that that officer is being treated in hospital with non-life-threatening injuries and will recover. There were no other people shot by the gunman. Police then returned fire, killing the gunman. We don't know his name or his age, but we do know that he was a male suspect. It's unclear, though, why he was at the school with a gun. So it was the gunman that was killed. It was a police officer that was struck in the shootout. Nobody else was shot. But what we do know is this particular school and the area around it has seen other shootings in recent months. Back in February, 3 other teenagers were killed in 3 separate shootings. So some very big questions as to why there seems to be a spate of shootings, especially amongst teenagers within this high school. And we obviously have seen a severe reduction in school shootings as a result of the pandemic. Many schools across the US have been shut, so therefore school shootings simply haven't happened. But now we're beginning to see those reopenings, and sadly we seem to be beginning to see those school shootings happen once again.
Right. Now, Nick, a follow-up question to that, and I think that's the question on everyone's minds right now. We know a legislation was passed by the Republican governor recently giving adults in Tennessee the right to carry handguns openly or concealed. So my question is there a need to revisit and to a certain extent reassess the gun laws in the United States in light of the recent shootings?
Well, undoubtedly, but that very fact that the governor is able to set the rules shows how difficult that is in the United States. Governors having the ability in all 50 states to essentially set their own gun rules. Tennessee is a southern state in the south of the country. It certainly has looser gun laws in comparison to, say, New York State, that has some of the strictest gun laws in the country. Remember, it was just last week that Joe Biden held a press conference at the White House, a special event to effectively talk about trying to tighten gun laws across the United States. He laid out 6 executive orders, things that he could carry out straight away without any approval from Congress, to try and tighten some of the regulations surrounding guns, including ghost guns, guns that can be sold on the internet and you assemble them at home. He wanted serial numbers adding to those so that they could be traced back to the buyer. But he also wants Congress to work with him on a number of measures. He says his top priority is to hold gun manufacturers liable for deaths. At the moment, they are exempt from being sued in any gun-related deaths. He wants to change that, but we're very unlikely to see that. Of course, Republicans across the United States are much more pro-guns, if we're talking broad brushstrokes. And as we've seen here in Tennessee, the Republican governor there is certainly doing all he can to effectively loosen the gun rules, to make it easier for people to carry firearms within his state.
Right. Nick, this, of course, is a developing story, and WION will continue to track updates. I request you to stay on this broadcast. We'd like you to weigh in on another story coming out of the U.S. Moving on, U.S. President Joe Biden met with the CEOs of 19 major companies on Monday to discuss the global chip shortage that has severely hurt U.S. automakers and also threatens other sectors, including national security. Now, during the meeting, Biden said that he has bipartisan support for the legislation to fund the semiconductor industry and that he had already included it in his massive $2 trillion infrastructure plan. Intel chief executive Pat Gelsinger, who attended the meeting, said that the company wanted to start producing chips at its factories within 6 to 9 months to address a shortage that has idled assembly lines at some U.S. automotive plants. This massive supply crunch could lead to a potential 1.3 million shortfall in the US car and light-duty truck production this year. Semiconductors are a key component of many computerized electronics.
Chips like the one I have here, these chips, these wafers, are batteries, broadband, it's all infrastructure. This is infrastructure. So look, we need to build the infrastructure of today, not repair the one of yesterday. And the plan I propose is going to create millions of jobs, rebuild America, protect our supply chains, and revitalize American manufacturing. And it's going to make America research and development a great engine again. We led the world in the middle of the 20th century. We led the world toward the end of the century. We're going to lead the world again. We're going to lead it again in the 21st century.
The White House meeting including executives from 19 major companies including General Motors, Global Foundries, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing & Co., AT&T, Samsung Electronics, Google parent company Alphabet, and it was also attended by the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, the National Economic Council Director Brian Deese, and Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. Automakers have been hit particularly hard by the global chip shortage after many cancelled orders when their plants remained idle due to the coronavirus pandemic. When they were ready to resume production, they found chip makers were busy fulfilling orders for the consumer electronics industry, which has seen a huge demand for premium devices, both for work and leisure, as people spent more time at home during the pandemic. Now, our correspondent Nick Harper is still with us on this broadcast live from Washington, D.C. Nick, tell us about this high-level meeting that President Biden is planning to chair with CEOs of some of the biggest companies in the United States. What does he hope to achieve from this meeting?
Well, Joe Biden essentially is trying to put the United States in a position where it can continue to compete around the United States, continue to produce its own semiconductors, its own chips, but also ensure that it can be safe, self-reliant. As we've seen during the course of the pandemic, these supply chains around the world have caused problems for the US. There were a number of parts, including essential medical supplies that they were trying to get from China that they simply weren't able to. Those global supply chains broke down during the pandemic. So the US wants to ensure that it is in a position to be able to continue supplying the US with all the chips that it needs. We've already seen those problems for the automotive industry in the US, Ford and General Motors temporarily closing plants. But Biden is also saying that this is an issue of national security, that these chips go into a whole range of things, from civilian life right through to the US military side of things. So he wants to keep American industry safe, but he also wants to keep Americans themselves safe. So he's very much pushing this idea that the US needs to spend much more to consolidate their efforts to be self-reliant in the manufacturing of these semiconductors. And that's why he's tying it into his massive $2 trillion infrastructure plan, saying that it's not just about roads and bridges and repairing those, but also putting things in place to make sure that the US is manufacturing the things that it needs for coming years.
Right. Nick, my final question for you. Give us a sense of how serious is the shortage of semiconductor chips as of now in the US, the kind of losses that businesses may suffer, and does President Biden also want to boost domestic manufacturing through this meeting?
Well, two plants have already closed, or two companies have already had to close some of their plants across the US temporarily. It means that workers aren't working at those plants, but the worry is that longer term, jobs may simply be lost. It's unclear if Joe Biden wants to pull in other industries into this, but at this stage, this is really a very strong selling point for the president. He knows that he's going to find it difficult to push through that $2 trillion infrastructure plan to get it through Congress. At the moment, Republicans very unwilling to support it. However, now he has a situation that he is calling a problem, but he's also presenting a solution. He's saying to these Republican lawmakers across the US, you may have job problems in your states as a result of the US not having chips. If we invest more in infrastructure, we will be able to solve this problem. So he is presenting a solution, which for him means, of course, getting the Republicans to work with him, that bipartisan support that he will very much need to get this through Congress. It's a huge issue, but he feels by pulling in these other issues that are affecting US jobs at this very moment, he has a better chance of getting it through Congress.
All right, Nick, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast with all your inputs.